Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach Aleph. We'll start on the bottom of Samach Amud Beis. And the Mishnah taught us that Mitzudas Chayav Yofos V'Dogim Yesh Bahem Mishum Gezel Mishum Darkei Shalom. And Rabbi Yossi Omer Gezel Gomer. So it means if I have an animal or fish that's trapped in a net, no one can steal it from me. So the Gemara says the following: the uzli v'oare kuli almalo pligi. There's no machlokas about balei chayim if the first guy, we'll call him Ruvain, had an animal that was caught in a net, or a net made of chutim, of various strings, or oare, which is a kind of a rubbery substance that's made of something that grows from the ground. And in all these cases, what happens is the animal gets trapped inside the trap. And Tanakama will agree to Rabbi Yossi in such a case that we're dealing with Gezel min HaTorah, because we have a principle called Kelev Shel Adam Konim Lo Afilu B'li Daito, that something that goes into your kelim and it was hefker, you make a kinyan through your kelim, because the keli operates midin chatzer, and chatzer shel adam konelo afilu below yediasa, afilu below daito. So therefore, the owner of the net has already established his kinyan on the balchai that was trapped inside the net. Ki pligi, is there real gezel in the following case? This is going to be the machlokes between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi. Belechi v'kukri. These are kind of hunting tools that don't have a receptacle. So, for example, you have something that catches on to a fish, but according to the strict letter of the law, it cannot serve as a chotzer, and that kli tzayid would not make a kinyan on his behalf, because it doesn't have the shem kli. It's not inside his kli, so it's not a chotzer. And the Tanakama says, therefore, the whole iser, for someone to take it out of this lechi or kurki, is only mipnei darkei shalom. Rabbi Yossi is going to say, no, it's a gezel gomer. It's complete gezel, and the Rabbanan established that you could be koneh something with a lechi and a kurki, even though it doesn't have a base kibul. And we saw that there's a similar machlokas in the cases of mitzias cheresh or sheuta or katan, and the nafkamina would be whether it can be motziat b'dayon. The Mishnah says mitzias cheresh sheuta v'katan. According to Tanakama, it's Mishum Darkei Shalom. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's Gezel Gomer. Rabbi Chizda, Gezel Gomer Midivreim. Don't misunderstand Rabbi Yossi. He's not claiming that there's a kinyan in a Torah. After all, Cherishot v'Katan have no das, and therefore they cannot be koneh midin das koneh when they have no das on a doraisa level. The Rabbanan, though, established a kinyan. L'maynaf kivnina. What difference does it make whether you call it Darkei Shalom or call it, as Rabbi Yossi calls it, Gezel Gomer? According to Tanakama, there's no doubt that it's also on a Darabana level to take this mitzvah and steal it from the owner. And Gemara says, Lo tzio b'dayon, that Rabbi Yossi goes as far as to say that since the Rabbanan established this as Gezel, therefore you can go into Beis Din with a claim that so-and-so stole your animal or fish that was caught in the net, and that's what Rabbi Yossi means, that the Chacham went as far as to be mitaking Gezel Mamish. Whereas according to Tanakama, Beis Din can't be mechayev that person who stole it to return it in the case of Cherishot v'Katan, because even after the Takonis Chacham, it's not really Gezel, it's only an Isur L'chatchila to do so, and that's Mishum Darkei Shalom. The Mishnah establishes that Oni HaMenakev, B'Rosh HaZayis, he's cutting down branches of olives from the olive tree. He's on top, and the olives fall onto the bottom. And the Mishnah establishes again a machlokus between the Tanakhama of Yossi about Tachtov. Masechet Tachtov, according to the Tanakhama, is only Gezel Midivrei Midarkei Shalom. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's Gezel Gomer. Tana, we learned in a brisa in Liket V'Nosan Biyad. However, if he was not just on the top of the tree cutting down branches, but he also actually had the zaysim in his hand. And then afterwards, he threw it to the ground so that when he comes down from the tree, he'll be able to collect all the zaysim. Hareza Gezel Gomer, that's already Gezel Doraisa. Once the olives were in his tree, in his hand, that's considered a kinyan yad, which means a kinyan hagbag, mashicha, whatever you want to call it. So therefore, that's Gezel Gomer Doraisa. Rav Kahana Vika Ozil Lehutzal. Rav Kahana was on his way to a place, a location called Hutzal. He saw a person who was holding on to rods, and with these rods, he was banging against the date tree, and the dates were falling down from the tree. Oh, wow. Rav Kahana figured these tamarim are hefker, they're ownerless. He never made a kinyan on them, and he did me a favor by knocking them down from the tree. So Rav Kahana went ahead, took the tamarim, and he started eating them. So that person says to him, Chazi Mar, take a look, Adoni. It's not just that I was banging with a stick, but rather I took the peros into my hands and then I threw them on the ground. It means that I made a kinyan gomor of Hagbah on metaltalin, and therefore you're in violation of Gezel Government Torah. And Rav Kahana was very impressed by the knowledge of that Gavra. Omalei me asri Rav Yoshiata. You must be a local in the town of Rav Yoshia, because you are such a baki in these halachos. I can see without any shadow of a doubt that you're from the city of Rav Yoshia, where he would darshan barabim, he would teach the members of his city all the halachas, and Kari Alei and Rav Kahana said about Rav Yoshia, Sadik Yisod Olam. Now, there's no discussion explicitly in the Gemara about whether or not Rav Kahana paid him for the peiros, for the tamarim, but I think it's fair to assume that since Rav Kahana could not deny the claim that this was Gezel Gomur, he probably had to pay him for the tamarim. The Mishnah says, Ein memachin biyad aniyeh nochrim b'leket shikhu pei b'nei darkei. If the goyim take from the leket shikhu pei, then we don't make a protest, we let it go by because of darkei shom. When there are non-Jewish poor people, we will support them together with Aniyah Yisrael. All this is again darkei shalom. And mevakrin chole nochrim im chole Yisrael. It's like my father, may rest in peace, was amongst his many different positions. He was also a chaplain in the Coney Island Hospital in Brooklyn. And when he would come into a room to visit a Jewish patient, he would say a few words to his non-Jewish neighbor. V'kovrim meisei nochrim im meisei Yisrael. If, let's say, for example, there was some sort of a pogrom, and during the pogrom, not only were Jews never killed, but even Goyim were killed, then we can bury them together. And all that is Mishum Darkei Shalom. And now we're up to the Mishnah here on Daf Samach Aleph. Mash'eles isha lechaverta hachashuda al hashvius. Now, what we're going to learn here in the Mishnah is that certain cases, you really should have avoided the possibility of getting involved with an over Pharaoh, but Mishum Darkei Shalom, the Rabbanan allowed it. Of course, that's not going to be in a case of a Doraisa, but certain cases, the Rabbanan. So, for example, now we're talking about Shvius. Now, the law is that Shvius after the Zman Bir, right? According to the Torah law, Peres Shvius are permissible. You're allowed to eat them up until Zman Bir. From the Zman Bir and on, which is called Kolu Peros Min Asadeh, then we have to be mechala them from the bias of Gemara Pesachim Nun Beis. Now, what does this Kili Min Abayis mean? So on that we have a controversy. Rashi and Pesachim and the Rambam in Shemitah V'Yol Perek Zayin holds that you have to destroy these peros if there's Zman Bir passed. But most of the Rishonim disagree. Tosam Pesachim and other Rishonim, they say that Bir means you have to be mafkir the peros lakol. And the minig is like those Rishonim. Now Rashi Masechet Yomi on Daf Pei Gimel seems to subscribe to that shita, and we have a mitzvah doraisa of Bir. Now, if a woman is chashuda ala shvius, let's say she's what we call an amoretz, and therefore she's holding on to the peros shvius even after Zman Bir, are you allowed to lend her a napa ukvara v'reichayim v'tanu? Are you allowed to give her access to these various types of kelim which she might use to eat and prepare and eat the food that is awesome because it's after the Shas Bir? And the answer is that technically you should avoid such a thing because in a sense you're being Messiah over Avera. But you're not doing it in a direct way. You're only giving her the kelim that she may use down the line and violate the Isser of Peros Shvius Liachar Bir. But you're not actively involved in the process of violating the Achila. Avalo tavur v'lo titchan ima. However, if it's not just that you're giving her a kli and she's going to use that utensil, but rather you are doing those pu'ulos, you are actually actively with your yadayim doing the birur. Birur means to take out the bad from the good, and the tchino, when you have these peros that need grinding to make them into, let's say, a flour, that's already Messiah la'ovre avera mamish. Biyadayim, you're actively helping someone violate the Isser of Achilas Peres Shvius Liachar Bir. But the Mishnah speaks about masros with the case of Eishes Chaver. Eishes Chaver is a woman who's married to someone who's reliable with regard to masros. And Mashelis li Eishes Amaoretz Nafa v'chivra uboreres v'tochenes rakedes ima. With regard to the problem of maser, the Mishnah is going to be more mekil, and not only is the Mishnah going to permit the Eishes Chaver to lend kelim to the Eishes Amaretz, and the Eishes Amaretz is not relied upon at all with regard to masros. You can duplicate the list that we had in the Reisha, the Nafa, Ukvara, V'reichaim, different types of sieves, and there are basically three different types of sieves. You have a Napa, a Kvara, and a Reichaim. Although he says that Reichaim is a small oven. Okay. In any event, the Mishnah in the Sefer goes a step further and allows the Eishes Chaver to actually be part and parcel of preparing the Peres for Achila. And therefore, Boreres v'tochenes u'rakedes ima. Aval mishetatil es hamayim, if they made kemach after the process of tchina, etc., then you're not allowed to lend a hand to pour the water into the flour. Lotiga ima. Now, the reason for this is that once you create an Isa, Ayin, Yud, Samachet, that means a dough, then you're chayav and challah. And we have a rule that klei ha'ma'aretz are tmeim. We assume that the utensils used by an ha'ma'aretz are b'chezkas tmeim, and therefore you're not allowed to cause tumah to challah, because challah has the same kedusha as truma, and therefore lo tiga, but don't get involved in the process of kneading the dough once you have a dough, because once you have a dough, there's already a chiv challah, and once the chiv challah, you're not allowed to be mitamecha. And therefore, if you start putting the isa into a kli, and this kli belongs to the balat bayit, who's an amoritz, then you're actually abetting in a crime. You are setting up tuma to challah, and challah has the same kedusha as truma. You're not allowed to be mitame truma or challah. So don't get involved in the process of lisha, of kneading the dough. Okay, now we have a ritva. The ritva says the after liel be'isa shvius asru gam litchon uvelavur. So in the ratio of the Mishnah with regard to shvius, there was a heter of litvar. I'm sorry, giving Caleb, but it was also litchon v'livar. Here, it says that lotiga imo, and it's only after netilas mayim. So then you're kneading the dough. That's prohibited, but it seems that grinding the flour would be mutter, even though in the case of shvius it was also. And he says that here the Isur is tumas achala. Kein ein l'sayer be'osa malacha shebahi metames achala. Which malacha could cause tumah to the challah? And that's only the actually kneading of the dough, which is called a violation of al-lotiga. Aval shar malachos, but let's say the malachos of grinding, she'ena misayes betuma, right? There's before the sinas mayim, there's no isur of tumas ha-peros because they're not yet challah. Mashen kiliel sha isur achilas ha-peros ein l'sayer b'chol masha m'sayer achanas achila. Any pu'ula that prepares it for eating, like being borer and removing the psoles, that's prohibited. V'lachein lo titchon v'tivar ima shegam malachos elu misayayos be'achila. So when the Isur is tumah, it's only after the Chal Hashem challah, which is only after netinas mayim. But up until then, all the malachos are mutter, because you're not being gorin tumah, it's before netilas mayim. But in the case of shvius, where there's an isra achila, then if you get actively involved in preparing the food, and this is peros of shvius liachar zman bir, that's prohibited. Now, in the Resha, when we spoke about Isha Chashuda al Shvius, and then in the Sefer we spoke about an Eishes Hamoretz. In both cases, we don't want to get involved in aiding, and the reason is Lefisha Ein Machzikin Yidei Over Aver. We don't want to help someone who's violating an Aver. there's no siyua that we give to an over avera. The kula lo amru el bnei shalom, and that which we were matir to lend kalim to those women, because it's shalom b'shas avera, you're not actively involved in preparing the food, but rather just in giving the kalim. Even that we really should have prohibited. That's also a level, albeit a few steps removed, but it's Messiah over Avera, but Mivnei Shalom, Darkei Shalom, they were matir. And he quotes here Rabbeinu Tam that in our Mishnah, we're talking about a case of Yadua she'en la ela peros shvius. Why do we need the heter of Darkei Shalom? Says Rabbeinu Tam, because without that heter, we know that she has peros shvius. That's all she's working with. So we can't say that she's maybe using something that's mutter. However, we can help a non-Jew during shvius, and avolo yedei Yisrael, but not a Jew who's doing a malach asur, v'sholem v'shlomam, and also we use Shem Hashem to say shalom. Shalom is the name of God, and we extend a greeting of shalom to a guy, even though we're using the Shem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because mipnei darkei shalom. So the Gemara asks the following question. There's a fundamental difference established by our Mishnah between helping an Isha Chashud al Ashvius and helping in the case of an Eshes Chaver with regard to the issue of Peros that are Chayiv in Maaseh. Maishna Reisha or Maishna Seifa. Why is it that at the beginning of the Mishnah, it's also Lavur V'Litchon? With regard to an Isha Chashuva al Ashvius, you're not allowed to grind or separate. And in the Seifa, when we speak about Eshes Amaretz, there it's Muta Livra V'Litchon, but Mishatita Amayim, only then are there problems. So Amar Abai. Abai says that even though we don't aid her if she's chashud al ashvius with borer or tochen, that's because we know that she's chashuda. We know that she prepares these peros for achila, even though you're not allowed to eat them. But in the case of Eshes HaMa'aretz, Rov HaMa'aretz Ma'asrim, when we got to the issue of Maaser, then Abai insists that most people, even though they're ignorant, they know to be mafresh, chumas, and masros. Chacham v'choshesh for those few minority people who do not implement Maaser. But therefore, Darkei Shalom, we can go back to the Rov, and we're going to assume that she will be Maser, Kedas, Ukidin. Rov Amar no. I'm not going to accept this principle of Rov Amoretz Ma'asr. It's a real suffix whether the Amoretz was Maser or not. And therefore it's clear that we should prohibit helping them in any way because there's a chashash of an Avera Doraisa. But Hoch in our Mishnah, why does the Mishnah allow Siyua? It's a case of Ba'ama Oretz de Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that you mafresh trumos umasros from the peros of an amoretz, but Rabbi Meir was not careful about eating these peros bitara. V'tuma v'tara d'Rabbanan. So the only kpeda here is with regard to tuma v'tara, and now we're talking about peros and food that is not truma, it's not kodshim. And midoraisa, there's no isa to be mitame chulin, but there's only an Isa D'Rabbanan. And therefore they were matir siyua because of, as we said before, Darki Shalom, if we assume that the problem is that the Amoritz, even though he's mafresh Shumas Maisus, he's not careful about Tahara. And the Kpeda of Tahara, in the case of Peros Chulin, that's all D'Rabbanan. Tisanya. Where do we find the machlokas between Rabbi Meir Chachamim regarding an Amoritz? Ezu Amoritz kol she'eino ochel chulav b'tara de Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is not worried about the fact that he's not mafresh truma or maser. We can rely on the Amoritz to do so. He doesn't want to mess around with Isa Tevel. But as far as Peres Chulin, we assume that they are Tmeim. They were put into Kelim Tmeim by the Amoritz, and you have to assume that they are Tameh. Chacham Omrim, Kol Shedo Maser Perosa. An Amoritz is someone who is not trustworthy on Afrashas Maser. He doesn't take 1/10 of his produce. Now, our Mishnah reflects the Shita Rabbi Meir, and the Eishes Amoritz is mafresh masros, but she's not makbid on chulin bitar. Frek the Gemara of Hamida Ketani Seifa, Misha Tatilas Hamayim Lo Tiga Ima. In the Seifa, we deal with an issue of Tuma Vitara. Why? Because once the Mayim was poured on to the flour and it became an Isa, it was already Hukshar Lekabel Tuma. And therefore, you're not allowed to be Mitame Shumos Umasros. And you have to add, as we said before, just to reiterate, that at this point in time, the Isa now becomes Mechuyeves Bechala. So again, the Netilas Mayim here, therefore, serves, if I understand correctly, two distinct purposes. First of all, it's one of the Machshirim L'Kabel Tumah, and dry fruits in a natural state are not L'Kabel Tumah because you need a Hechsher, a Machshirin of Mayim. And secondly, with Netilas Mayim, not only is it Roy L'Kabelas Tumah, because it's now got a Hechsher of a Machshirin, at the same time became challah, and we're not allowed to be mitame challah. So the Gemara is now medayik. Since the Sefer is talking about a case of mishatatil es hamayim, it means that we have an issue of machshirin for Kabbalah's tumah. And at this point, as a result of that Tolas Mayim, it's an Isa of Gilgul that's Machayim and Chala. So you have now a dough which is already wet, and therefore it's Hukshal Kabul Tuma, and it's Chala because of Gilgul Isa Liachar Nesinas Mayim, is Michal Dereishal Labetum Vitaraskina. It can't be that the Reishas talk about Tum V'Tara because the Mishnah only introduced Tum V'Tara in the Sefer. So by implication, the Reishas is not talking about Tum V'Tara. And it's before Nesinas Mayim. If it's before Nesinas Mayim, then there's no Machshirin, and it's not Mukhshal Kabul Tumah. So it's only now that the Isur will come into being. And if you're telling me that there's no chashash as far as Peres She'ena Musarim, because we're going to rely on Rov Hamioris Ma'asrim, so why is there a heter to help someone who would not be doing what, Kedasu Kedin? He's violating the din. He's being Mitame Chala. And therefore, this is not Mishum Darkei Shalom over here. If it's before Nesinas Mayim, then there's no Tumah Vitara. There's no Hechshel Kabel Tumah. There's no Chashash Isa, so don't tell me it's Mishum Darkei Shalom. So Gemara answers Reisha v'Seifa b'Tum Vitara. Both the Reisha that allows you to be Messiah only because of Darkei Shalom, and even though the Mayim wasn't yet put into the Isa. And the Sefer that says you're not allowed to be Messiah is talking about after the Netilas Mayim. And B'Tum V'Tara, meaning both the Reish and the Sefer are addressing issues of Tum V'Tara. It means the parents were already Mukshal L'Kabel Tumah. Reisha b'tumas chulin. So if this woman is mitame the pero, she's only being mitame chulin. Now we don't want to allow being mitame chulin, but nevertheless they were matir mishum darkei shalom because it's only an isa d'rabbanan. So that's as far as the Reish is concerned. The Seifa is B'tumas Chala. It's after Nesinas Mayim, and therefore you have a Gilgal Isa. It became Chayiv in Chala. And now if she's Metame, the Chala B'Yadayim, that's an Isa Doraisa. The Torah says that's Mishmeres Trumosai. We have to be careful to be Shomer Truma B'Tara. And it's only Mishum Darkei Shalom that we were matir. Without Darkei Shalom, I'm sorry, and even with Darkei Shalom, we cannot be matir. Ura minhu. The Gemara asks a kasha on this interpretation that you're allowed to be Messiah Ochle Tuma, Ochle Chulin Bituma.